This is Autism in the Structure of Reality series, part 15, the second episode on the parable of the weeds. For today's episode, we will discuss harvesting the seeds. In part 1, we ask what are we growing into and how thoughts, values, temptations, and repeated choices slowly become a person. But becoming does not stop with the individual. When something grows, it becomes visible. Other people see it, they imitate it, and eventually, what began as a seed within one human being can become something much larger, a pattern, a culture, even a system. So part 2, I want to follow the seed outward. What happens when what we become begins shaping what other people become? Human beings don't become who they are in a day. We tend to notice dramatic moments because dramatic moments are visible. A marriage ends, a relationship ends, a person explodes in anger. Someone betrays a friend. Someone commits an extraordinary act of courage. A public figure falls, a movement erupts, a society changes. We see the visible moment, but we rarely see the invisible growth that preceded it. The thousands of thoughts, the repeated compromises, the small acts of courage, the tiny resentments, the moments of attention, the conversations, the values quietly rehearsed over years. We see the tree. We didn't see the seed. And I think that matters enormously when we look at other people, because we imitate trees. We don't imitate seeds. We imitate what has become visible. The successful person, the powerful person, the beautiful person, the courageous person, and the merciful person. The person who appears to have something we want. Carl Jung in The Undiscovered Self talks about this beautifully. We are comparing ourselves to others. How do we know who we are comparing ourselves to knows anything about life? And something within us begins to ask, how do I become that? Sometimes that's wonderful. We see courage, and it awakens courage within us. We witness forgiveness, and suddenly forgiveness seems possible. We encounter someone genuinely humble, and for the first time, we realize that humility is not weakness. We watch someone suffer without becoming cruel, and it changes our understanding of strength. But the opposite happens too. We see wealth without seeing what was sacrificed to obtain it. We see power without seeing what the pursuit of power did to the person pursuing it. We see attention without seeing the dependence it created. We see the fruit that is advertised. We don't see the roots. And then we imitate. This is why the Lord's Prayer is all about the hierarchy and orienting to God first, then Logos, which is Jesus as the connector to the physical beings, and then Satan behind us. Get behind me, Satan. One person becomes something. Other people see it. They imitate it. Enough people imitate it, and it becomes normal. What becomes normal becomes expected. What becomes expected begins to shape institutions, and institutions begin planting those seeds in people who enter them. The process becomes circular. Human beings create systems. The systems begin creating certain kinds of human beings, and eventually an entire society can become so accustomed to a particular way of living that almost no one remembers to ask, why are we growing this? Or perhaps the more difficult question, what is it growing us into? This is where I think both Nietzsche and Kierkegaard become indispensable conversation partners. Nietzsche asks us to examine the genealogy of our values. Where did they come from? Who decided what was desirable? What kind of life do those values produce? Kierkegaard asks something more personal. Who are you actually becoming? Are you actually becoming a self? Or have you disappeared into the crowd? Because the crowd can give us values we never chose, desires we never examined, enemies we never personally knew, and definitions of success we may spend our entire lives pursuing without ever asking whether they were worthy of us. And perhaps one of the strangest things about being human is that we can spend decades growing toward a destination we never consciously selected. We can become enormously successful at becoming someone we never actually wanted to be. That's why I keep returning to the question, what are we growing into? Not what do we say we believe? Not what values do we claim to possess? Not what kind of person do we imagine ourselves to be? What is actually growing? What does the fruit reveal? What has our attention been feeding? And what are repeated actions constructing? What kind of person is slowly emerging? Because a seed does not remain a seed. Eventually, something becomes visible. This is where the parable of the weeds introduces one of the most difficult questions in all of Christianity. If there are good seeds and bad seeds growing in the same field, why doesn't God simply remove the bad ones? Why allow evil to grow? Why allow deception to spread? Why allow cruelty to continue? Why permit people to suffer because of what someone else has become? Why doesn't God intervene now? Not eventually, now. Human beings have asked versions of that question for thousands of years. And in Matthew 13, the servants ask something remarkably similar. They see the weeds growing among the wheat, and they ask the master, do you want us to go and pull them up? The answer is one word, no. And I think that may be one of the most unsettling answers Jesus ever gives, because the master explains that in pulling up the weeds, they may uproot the wheat along with them. And suddenly the question is no longer only, why does God permit evil to remain? Another question appears, one that may be even more uncomfortable. What if human beings do not see enough of the field to know what can be removed without destroying something else along it? The end of the Sermon on the Mount ends with judgment. You do not judge. You do not ride around on a white horse claiming to be the Word. That is not our role. And in reality, you shouldn't want that role. And that is where the parable of the weeds becomes not only a story about evil, it becomes a story about the limits of human vision, and perhaps eventually about the extraordinary humility required to admit those limits. And I think we should stay with that answer for a moment, because human beings do not like incomplete answers. We do not like uncertainty. We do not like looking at something that appears obviously wrong and being told that we may not understand it enough to fix it without causing something else to break. We want clarity. Wheat, weed, good, bad, right, wrong. Remove this, preserve that. And to be clear, there are things that are wrong. There is evil in the world. There is cruelty. There is deception. There is exploitation. The parable of the weeds does not ask us to pretend that good and evil are indistinguishable. Jesus himself distinguishes them. There is wheat and there are weeds. But recognizing that good and evil exist is not the same thing as possessing God's view of the entire field. And perhaps that is one of the most difficult limitations for a human being to accept. We can see, but we cannot see everything. Just because you don't know something is true doesn't mean it's not true. I find the servant's response remarkably human. They see the weeds, and their immediate reaction is, "Do you want us to pull them up? There is a problem. Let's remove it. There is evil. Let's eliminate it. There is someone who is wrong. Let's separate them." And throughout human history, we have been extraordinarily confident in our ability to identify the weeds. The problem is that the people doing the pulling almost always believe they are the wheat. That's what makes this so dangerous. Very few people wake up in the morning believing themselves to be evil. Very few crowds believe they are the wrong side of history. Very few systems describe themselves as unjust. Human beings are remarkably capable of committing terrible acts while believing we are serving something good: justice, purity, order, progress, God, the nation, the future, the greater good. We identify what must be protected. Then we identify what threatens it. Then we identify who represents that threat. And once a human being becomes a weed rather than a person, pulling becomes much easier. But I don't want to go too far into judgment yet, because I think that deserves its own conversation. We'll probably do a whole episode on judgment. What fascinates me here is something more fundamental. Why are human beings so certain that we can see the whole field? Why are we so confident in our judgments of other people? Why are we so quick to believe that we know not merely what someone else has done, but who they are? We see one action, one failure, one opinion, one moment, one version of a person, and then we make a judgment about the whole. But the human beings exist through time. We are becoming. The person you see today is not necessarily the person who will exist 10 years from now. Neither are you. And I think this creates an extraordinary tension within the image of the field. Because when we look at another human being, we see what is visible now. We see the tree as it stands today. But we don't see every seed that was planted. We don't see every storm, every drought, every injury, every act of kindness that changed something, every moment of suffering, every decision that has not yet been made, every future act of courage, every possibility of repentance, every transformation that has not yet occurred. We see a moment in the process of becoming, and then sometimes we speak as though we've seen the whole life. This is one reason I think humility belongs so deeply within the parable. Not the kind of humility that means thinking poorly of yourself, not pretending you have nothing to offer, not refusing to distinguish between truth and deception, or good and evil. I mean the humility to recognize the difference between having a perspective and possessing the entire view. The difference between seeing something real and seeing everything. You may be right about what you see and still not see enough. I think that distinction is incredibly important because human beings tend to imagine that the alternative to certainty is ignorance. It isn't. There is a space between them, a space where we can say, I see something. I believe it matters. I will act according to what I understand. And I remain aware that I do not possess God's view of the entire field. That is not weakness. That may be wisdom. And perhaps this is where the tree of the knowledge of good and evil becomes such an interesting companion to the weeds. I want to be careful here. I am not saying the tree in Genesis and the parable of the weeds are secretly the same story, but I am fascinated by the tension between them. At the beginning of the biblical story, human beings reach for the knowledge of good and evil. And then throughout human history, we repeatedly become extraordinarily certain that we know exactly who is good, who is evil, who belongs and who doesn't, who deserves mercy, who deserves to be uprooted. Then in Matthew 13, the servants look across the field. They see the weeds and immediately ask, should we pull them? The master says no. And I can't help but wonder whether there is something deeply human being revealed in the moment. We don't merely want to know good and evil. We want to administer the field. We want to decide. We want to separate. We want to control the outcome. We want to stand high enough above the field that we can see the whole thing. But we can't. We are standing inside it. And that may be one of the great difficulties of being human. We participants in reality, trying to make judgments about reality. We are not neutral observers. We have histories, wounds and fears, desires and blind spots, loyalties, resentments. We belong to families and cultures and political groups and religions and professions and generations. We inherit ways of seeing before we know that we are seeing through them. And then we look at the field and say, I know exactly what I'm looking at, but we don't. Or are sometimes looking through a lens we have never examined. This is one of the reasons psychology matters so much to me, and philosophy, and the Gospels. Because each in its own way asks us to do something remarkably different. Look at how you look at the world. Not merely at the world, at the way you are seeing it. Because the person looking is part of the equation. And I think this is where the crowd becomes especially dangerous. An individual can be wrong, but a crowd can make being wrong feel like certainty. If everyone around me sees the same weed, then surely they must be weeds. If everyone says this person is dangerous, then surely they are dangerous. If everyone agrees that the idea is unacceptable, then surely it must be unacceptable. The crowd doesn't merely give us answers. It can give us confidence. And confidence is not the same thing as truth. Kierkegaard understood this. Nietzsche understood this. Jesus taught it because he is a master of it. The crowd can shout, Hosanna, on one day and crucify him shortly afterward. The crowd can make the extraordinary feel normal. It can also make cruelty feel righteous. And perhaps most dangerously, it can allow each individual person to feel less responsible for what the group does. No single person has to say, I chose this. We can say, we chose this. Or even more comfortably, this is simply what people do. But crowds do not appear from nowhere. They are made of human beings, and human beings are shaped by what they repeatedly see, which brings us back to the tree. The seed grows, the tree becomes visible. People see it, they imitate it. Enough people imitate it, and it becomes normal. Normal becomes expected. Expected becomes institutionalized, and eventually the system begins planting the same seed in the next generation. This is how a value can outlive the person who first embodied it. This is how courage survives, how mercy survives, how wisdom also survives, but also how resentment survives, how hatred survives, and how fear, so powerful, persists with survival. How a lie can become so old that no one remembers it was ever planted. The tree produces more seeds, and the cycle begins again. As we wrap up today on this part of the weeds, I want to be cautious. I want you to be cautious on how we view the world. Understand how you view the lens that you are looking at other people and looking at yourself. I think maybe a big takeaway here is from Jung, Undiscovered Self, about comparing yourself to others as if, how do you even know they have anything figured out? How do you know about their sacrifices, their pains, their struggles, their identity and suffering? You are not them. You have to look at a higher power. You have to be oriented to a hierarchy and have a higher figure above you. You imitate it. You mimic it. You become it. This higher power shapes your destination. And that is very important. Not your neighbor, not your coworker, not your boss, not a professional figure or a celebrity. Those are vanities of life. If you're listening to the podcast, listening to the episode, please feel free to leave a review or rating. In podcasting, reviews, ratings, and downloads are huge, and I very much appreciate your feedback. You can contact me on X at RPS47586. Even though this isn't so much about autism anymore, it kind of still is. But I would still love interactions about autism, and check out the previous episodes about autism and those wonderful guests that I used to have on. All that information is still available. And I'm still here to talk about autism with you. But this shift into philosophy and life is very valuable, and I want to pursue this. You can contact me via email, info.fromthespectrum@gmail.com. You can check out the YouTube page, full-length videos, shorts, and clips. You can subscribe. I don't necessarily care. I want you to see the material. I want you to grow in life. This is what this is all about. I want you to help the autistic person shaped by these institutions that are not really serving any help. I want these autistic people to utilize their powers in a way that God gives them, not by shaping them into something that they're not. Thank you for listening to From the Spectrum podcast. First, I would like to mention MAYU water. If you're trying to upgrade your hydration, MAYU uses a vortex flow system that mimics how water naturally moves in rivers and streams. That motion helps increase oxygenation and release unwanted gases like chlorine, improving overall water quality and making it easier to stay consistently hydrated. But here's what most people overlook. Hydration isn't just about water. It's about minerals and absorption. MAYU allows you to remineralize your water with essential minerals and electrolytes, supporting cellular hydration, energy levels, and overall physiological balance. When your water has the right structure and mineral content, your body can actually use it more efficiently. If you care about hydration, performance, or just feeling better day to day, this is one of those simple upgrades that adds up. You can get 10% off with the code AUTISM. Next, Daylight Computer Company and Daylight Kids. These devices are designed to work with your brain, not against it. And honestly, the future of tech is already here. Most screens are built for stimulation, bright, fast, and attention-grabbing. But that often leads to eye strain, mental fatigue, and disrupted sleep. Daylight takes a different approach. By reducing blue light and lowering overall sensory load, these devices support sustained focus, calmer attention, and healthier sleep patterns. For anyone who feels drained after screen time, or for kids whose nervous systems are still developing, this creates a much more natural, regulated way to engage with technology. If you want your tech to support your brain instead of overstimulating it, this is worth checking out. Use code AUTISM for $50 off. And finally, Chroma light devices, lights designed for humans. Natural light contains a full spectrum that our brains and bodies are tuned to. But most modern indoor lighting falls short of that. It's often narrow, harsh, and out of sync with how we're designed to experience light. Chroma is built to bring that balance back. These lights are designed to better reflect the qualities of natural light, supporting your circadian rhythm, reducing sensory strain, and creating environments that feel calmer and more aligned. That can translate into better sleep, more stable energy, and a nervous system that isn't constantly being pushed toward overload. If you have ever felt off under certain lighting and didn't know why, this is worth exploring. Get 10% off with the code AUTISM. If you're optimizing your environment, your focus, your well-being, your nervous system, these products are worth checking out. If you're raising a child with autism, you've probably experienced the confusion that comes with trying to make sense of it all. One expert says one thing, another says the opposite. And social media is full of opinions. Every week there's a new therapy, a new program, a new approach claiming to be the answer. And somewhere in the middle of all this noise, you're trying to figure out what's actually best for your child. That's why I recommend Lynn Arcuri and Elevate How You Navigate. Lynn is the father of an autistic son, host of the Autism Parenting Secrets podcast, and someone who understands firsthand how overwhelming the autism journey can be. His focus isn't on adding more noise. It's on helping parents gain clarity, confidence, and a practical path forward. Through his coaching and guidance, Lynn helps parents cut through the noise, sort through conflicting advice, and make decisions with greater confidence. The goal isn't to tell you what to think. It's to help you navigate your family's unique situation with greater certainty and purpose. Lynn offers a free strategic clarity call where you can discuss your family's challenges, explore opportunities for growth, and identify meaningful next steps. To learn more or schedule your free call, visit elevatehowyounavigate.com. Because when parents have clarity, they can navigate with confidence, and that can make all the difference in the world.